Hi, welcome to the Heart-Mind Connection, a scientific look. I'm Lindley Craig, NLP trainer and president of the NLP Association in Singapore. And I'm going to be your guide today in this video presentation on the Heart-Mind Connection. The reason it was important for me to bring this information to you is because I see a perfect storm happening. We have poor nutrition. A lot of companies produce all sorts of nasty chemicals in our food now, and a lot of processed food, and a lot of people eating out, high salt, high fat, all sorts of nutritional issues, gut disorders, etc. We have environmental toxins, lots of plastics and pollution in the air, and environmental things that are affecting us on many different levels. Most we don't even know about. We have a family situation or crisis in my world, at least. I call it a crisis. And it's families that have been torn apart by divorce, or families that both parents are working and there's no family harmony, there's no communication anymore. And that has a lot to do with the fact that our technology has come to a point where it's actually doing less of a job of connecting than it is doing a great job of disconnecting. So it's not unusual for me to go to a dinner with a restaurant with my husband and the table next to us and the table next to that and a table next to that, where everybody is on their phone and no longer interacting or communicating with each other. So we also have, these cultural norms and rules and morals that used to be governed by communities or cultures, and now are being governed by social media and advertising. And so we also have an education system in most parts of the world that is now a business and is no longer just about educating the young and giving them the skills that they need to be able to grow up to be, good human beings and good people for the environment and good people for communities and good people for the world. So it's more about the money, and unfortunately, in many cases. So there are all these signs out there for me, and the signs I see all the time because of my coaching business. These are signs that stress is giving off. There's signs that people need to pay attention to. And they're signals because our bodies are speaking to us. And when we listen and when we act, we can prevent permanent damage. When we ignore the small warnings, we will pay a heavy price. And from an NLP standpoint, stress is a prime disabler of positive change. So we want to make sure that we take as much of this stress out of our life. And I, as a coach, need to be acutely aware of the signs of chronic stress. See, many of my clients have issues, and they come to me about these issues in their lives. Some may be depressed. Some may have anxiety. All of them have something going wrong, which is why they hire me in the first place. Whatever it is, it's gotten so bad, they are paying someone to help them get rid of it. My problem is that my clients really don't see how bad it is. They can't see the effects of 14 years of psychotherapy. I can. They can't see the deterioration of 10 years of depression. I can. They can't see the results of a lifetime of anxiety. I can. And I needed a way to show them what I already knew to be true. So I took a specialized training to connect the science of stress on the mind and body to what I do as a trainer and a coach. Stress is emotional unease, in large part due to our ongoing perceptions and internal emotional programs, even in the absence of external stimuli. It basically means that we're having stress without anything out there stressing us out. From NLP, we know that everybody creates meanings to every situation that occurs in their lives. And we have reactions to these meanings when actually nothing has happened. There's a great quote that says, everything has absolutely no meaning until the meaning we actually give it. It's all just data. It's all just random stuff out there until we actually give it meaning. So from my perspective as a coach, and from an NLP training perspective, I like to make sure that people understand that depression is reliving a past mistake or perceived failure, some sort of lack, or maybe potentially a traumatic event. And even though it's over with, we keep having emotional unease about it. And anxiety is having the same process that basically is happening in the future, where events haven't actually occurred yet, but we're imagining catastrophic situations or problems or issues to arise somewhere down the road. And so it's also important for me to have people get a clear understanding of the facts about stress. The first fact is that your body doesn't care if your stress is big or small. It still will cascade about 1,400 biochemicals that will go racing through your body. Now, maybe that's worth repeating. 1,400 biochemicals racing through your body. And it doesn't matter if you're a little bit annoyed about the fact that your paper didn't come today, or you're upset and about the traffic that is outside your house, or your spouse came home and was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. It doesn't matter how big the stress is. The exact same biochemicals get released through your body. And that's a pretty big fact to understand. The next fact to understand is that stress makes smart people do really stupid things. It's called cortical inhibition. So there's a small part of the brain that gets affected, but it has huge detrimental results. The next fact about stress, and the one that I see most often, is that people have become numb to stress. Physiologically, they're still experiencing stress, but they don't see or feel it because they've become so accustomed to what it feels like. The deterioration is still happening in the body. You just don't know it. One of the reasons that I'm giving this particular presentation is that because I want to make sure that people understand what it looks like, even if they're numb to it. So, another important fact about stress: you can learn how to control your stress and thereby also control effects it has on your body. Now, from an NLP perspective, of course, we don't actually believe in stress being a thing. I mean, it's not something you can have, really. You don't possess stress. You can't pick it up. You can't take it to the grocery store with you, or can't put it in a wheelbarrow, as we normally say. But the fact is that most people believe in stress and talk about stress as it's something that they can have. From an NLP perspective, we like to look at stress as something that you do. And of course, if it's something that you can do, it's also something that you can't do. So you can actually learn not to do it. And that would be also really great to do. So what we're going to do also tonight is learn not only what stress looks like, in case you're numb to it. We're also going to learn what to do about it, because after all, it's a doing thing. And the last fact about stress that I would love you to know is that the best time to deal with a stressor is in the very moment you're experiencing it, i.e. now. If you are experiencing any type of stress in the present moment, or in the next moment, or the moment after that, it's all about being able to know how to deal with that stress in that particular moment. So that's really important. In this video session, you're going to learn a few techniques on how to stop the 1400 biochemicals and get your heart and mind back on track. But first, I would like to present some science to you so that you have a very clear understanding of what I'm going to be presenting later on, as in how do we see stress in our bodies. We all know that taking someone's pulse is only an average, often called a resting heart rate, because the heart is actually speeding up and slowing down all the time. If you look at this particular slide, you'll notice the intervals in this example, which the heart rate is actually speeding up. So you can see that the beats per minute are actually increasing as the time in between the beats decreases. So it's our autonomic nervous system that regulates our heart's rate or pulse. And our autonomic nervous system has two branches. The sympathetic branch, which drives the increase in our heart rate, and the parasympathetic, which slows it down. If you think of it like a car, the sympathetic is the accelerator of the car, and the parasympathetic is the brake. Now, if you've ever been in a car where somebody is driving with one foot on their accelerator and the other foot on their brake, you can understand the concept of what I'm talking about. It's as if you're accelerating and then you're braking, and then you're accelerating and you're braking, and you're accelerating and you're braking, and you're jerking back and forth as the person drives the car, because at moments you're going in a forward accelerating kind of way, and then when it's braking, you're kind of pushed back into your chair. So you need to keep that in mind as we go through this discussion, or the scientific discussion, about heart rate variability. So with that in mind, it's also important that you understand that your breathing modulates the nervous system. So on inhalation, you're increasing your sympathetic activity, and on exhalation, you're increasing your parasympathetic activity. So the beat-to-beat change in your heart rate is called heart rate variability. So it's just, again, the heart rate's variability. Over time, you can see that there's a pattern to the beat-to-beat changes in your heart. Now, when we're young, we have the most heart rate variability, and as we get older, it steadily declines. So when we look at an age-adjusted heart rate variability, if we have a normal or a below normal heart rate variability for our age, it's a strong and independent predictor of future health problems. And that's the kind of thing that we want to know, or more importantly, we want to see. So heart rate variability is an important indicator of psychological resiliency and our ability to handle stress. So not only is our heart rate variability important to us from a physiological aspect, i.e. preventing disease and preventing issues with our heart, as well as cancer and diabetes and other things that are things that kill you. The heart rate variability is also important to our psychological resiliency, our ability to adapt to stressful situations no matter what comes up in what environment. So higher levels of heart rate variability are associated with superior mental performance on tasks requiring executive functions. So that's any kind of task that requires you, to make a decision, to decide what's better for you, what's right and wrong, any kind of critical thinking skills. So your heart rate variability is really important to not only your body, but also your mind. So what really affects heart rate variability? Well, number one, our emotions are reflected in the patterns of our heart rhythms. Heart rate variability patterns can be coherent or incoherent at low or high heart rates. An individual's coherent or incoherent HRV patterns can sometimes have the same amount of variability. The HRV patterns in the heart rhythms indicate whether you are in a coherent state or an incoherent state. And with practice, everybody can learn to shift from incoherence to coherence anytime and anywhere. So the two rhythms of the heart rate variability you see in front of you now are of the same person. So one is a typical picture of heart rate variability incoherence of someone who is either frustrated or irritated, has anxiety or worry in some way, shape, or form. And this inhibits our brain function, impairs our ability to think, and it impairs our performance. Not to mention, over time, this is going to cause physiological effects that may result in disease or other things like heart attacks or cancer. So, on the right-hand side, you see the heart rate variability of coherence. These are positive emotions like appreciation or love or care. And this type of coherence facilitates our brain function and promotes optimal performance. And I'm not just saying like promotes, you being normal. I'm saying that it promotes optimal performance. It promotes you to be able to work at your best, to really excel, not just be sort of status quo. So the cool part about heart rate variability is that a lot of professional athletes are using this science to be able to help them to train better. They understand now that by watching their heart, they can see when they're overtraining, i.e. they're in a state of coherence or incoherence, and when it's time to rest. And because the rest and renewal process is so important to athletes that they want to make sure that the renewal process occurs, and they watch for the heart rate variability and the coherence in that variability to be able to indicate when it's best to go back to training. As it indicates here, depleting emotions such as frustration, impatience, or anxiety are reflected in this irregular, chaotic heart rate variability pattern. And it's indicating the activity between the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems is completely out of sync. If you remember the situation where I was telling you about the car, you can appreciate this out of sync thing when somebody's accelerating, braking, accelerating, braking, accelerating, braking. That's the out of sync pattern. And it really makes sense when you look at the graph here, how you can feel that stop, go, stop, go kind of thing when you look at the pattern here on the screen. When the heart sends a lot of information to the brain through the autonomic nervous system, this incoherent rhythm inhibits our brain function, impairing performance and amplifying energy drains. So maybe that's worth repeating just again. It amplifies energy drains. So if you're feeling as if you don't have enough energy in your life, then this is a really good time to pay attention to the rest of this video session. So let's look at the heart-brain relationship. We know, based on the research done in Canada and the US, that the heart has its own intrinsic nervous system consisting at least 40,000 neurons. This is considered an intelligent system which is constantly sending information to your brain. The neural signals the heart sends to the brain especially affect the brain centers involved in decision-making and emotional experience. The heart has a complex nervous system consisting of many types of neurons. Scientists around the world who study the heart's nervous system actually call it the brain and the heart. There are large nerve pathways connecting the heart and the brain, and many of these pathways have connections to higher perceptual centers in the brain. This means that there is an important and ongoing neurological conversation taking place between the heart and the brain. The heart signals especially affect the brain centers involved in decision-making, creativity, and emotional experience. Heart researchers have learned that the brain sends information to the heart that affects the timing of the heartbeat, and the heart sends important information back to the brain. When science map out the biological conversation, they clearly see that the heart is sending a lot more information to the brain than the brain is sending to the heart. In fact, it's well known now that many brain functions are critically dependent on the signals that are coming from the heart. The heart is the most powerful generator of rhythmic information patterns in the body and helps to synchronize our entire system via the information it sends back to the brain. If you haven't been paying attention to your heart, then it's really important right now to pay attention to this. Your heart is actually sending more information up to your brain than the brain sends down to your heart. It's really, really important. As you can see in this particular slide, the heart has information that's traveling up through the medulla. This is where your blood pressure and autonomic nervous system regulation occurs. Then it sends the information up to the thalamus as well as to the amygdala. So the thalamus is the place in your brain that synchronizes cortical activity. And remember when I told you at the very beginning that when you are stressed, there's this thing called cortical inhibition. And that's basically the effect that the thalamus has. So when you have this anxiety type of wave that you see on your left-hand side in that red spiky little wave format, the thalamus is what's being inhibited. So because of the fact that it synchronizes cortical activity, it's putting things into the cortex. Then when it doesn't operate correctly, it obviously can't put the right things in the right area of the cortex, your thinking brain. So the amygdala is our emotional memory. So not only do the pathways go from our heart up to the cortex of our brain, but they also go to the amygdala. And so sometimes the information is actually bypassing the cortex altogether and going directly to the amygdala. This is often what happens when people have instantaneous reactions to certain situations. The cortex is never involved in the reaction to the situation. It's only the amygdala coming from the emotional memory. And that information has come up from your heart. So that's why it's really important for me to let you know about these kinds of things, so you can get that pattern, that wave that exists on the right-hand side of the page. Now, low heart rate variability has a heap of medical risks associated with. It's most predictive of future adverse outcomes, and that basically means that there's going to be something that happens potentially to you if you have a continuation of your low heart rate variability. It's associated with all-cause mortality in a healthy population. So when you look at people who are a low heart rate variability, those are the people that are most likely going to have issues with cancer, heart disease, diabetes, etc. It's also the development of the metabolic syndrome and cardiovascular disease and death. So it's a predictor of these kinds of things. And that's kind of important to know because of the fact that if you have a low HRV, you certainly want to know, especially if you have 12 years to be able to solve it. It's also correlated with low levels of testosterone, associated with higher levels of inflammation. And everybody knows now that inflammation is really, really bad for the body. Adrenal insufficiency, so people that have adrenal issues, we often find low HRV in association with that or as a predictor of that. The autonomic nervous system function as measured by HRV is different in children with asthma, and it also appears in people with fibromyalgia or chronic pain. So this is a picture of somebody's heart rate variability of a person who is in an anxiety, and you can see these really high spikes of their heart rate going through. There's no coherence to this. There's no pattern. It's just all erratic. And so that's kind of what anxiety looks like. And then here's somebody that I've actually worked with who had an anxiety issue. Now, this person was a triathlete, and though they were very physically fit and their numbers were very high referenced out of the range, i.e., their physical body was in really super, super duper shape. The problem is that their anxiety, as you can see by the spikes, was not in really great shape. And their normalized coherence, that means their heart was only in coherence about 30% of the time. That's awful. So it's no wonder that this person was diagnosed with a chronic fatigue syndrome, i.e. adrenaline fatigue, i.e. the fact that she had so much anxiety in her life that she was completely zapped of any type of energy. And I told her, perhaps maybe it's not an adrenal chronic fatigue syndrome. Maybe it's just the fact that you don't have any coherence in your heart. So once she has an opportunity to work on her coherence in her heart, this can all straighten out. And she doesn't have to worry about any kind of issues in the future with her heart because her athletic performance is protecting her right now against anxiety and stress-related effects. So here's another one of depression. So as you see, this is a very different type of graph. When we look at the HRV of someone who's depressed, they have very little heart rate variability, i.e. there's no there's no peaks, there's no the line kind of stays the same. It goes up and down just slightly, but not very much. This is where somebody's experiencing that social withdrawal, mental fog. They kind of feel like everything's sluggish and terrible. These are the people who are normally ruminating about something that has occurred in the past. And this is another example of somebody that I worked with who also was experiencing a form of depression, which also can be chronic anxiety. So if somebody has lived with anxiety for all of their life, that it becomes that numbness, this is what it actually looks like. It's the fact that they have no variability in their heart rate, very, very little. So this person has much more problems with their health, and their reference ranges are all under their reference range. So they're having a lot more issues with health-related problems, and it's very clear that from their graph and the indications of their measurements that their health problems are going to continue until they get this sorted out. Not only does our low HRV affect our physiological health, it affects our mental health as well. So it's associated with a lower self-regulatory capacity. I'm going to get into what that specifically means in a little bit. It's low prefrontal cortical performance and ability to inhibit unwanted memories and intrusive thoughts. So if you think about that, if you're struggling with trying to get something out of your mind and you can't seem to get it out, if you try to meditate and your to-do list keeps coming into your mind, maybe it's about your low heart rate variability that's causing that issue, because you can't stop your brain from going into those places. So it's also difficulties with emotional regulation and impulse control. So people who often have problems with addiction or food addictions or drug addictions, this is an impulse control thing. They're giving themselves rewards or looking at only the short term and not looking at their long-term health. So impulse control, because of the fact that their heart isn't actually sending the right signals to their brain to make the critical decisions they need for their long-term health. So anxiety disorders, depression, poor social engagement, emotional regulation, anger management, post-traumatic stress disorder, and low HRV appears to be associated with a lot of early childhood traumas, which is what happens often in the clients that I see from a coaching perspective. Is I see a lot of early childhood traumas. And thankfully in NLP we have a saying that says that it's never too late to have a happy childhood. There's a lot of things we can do from an NLP perspective in that category. All right, so here's another graph about the acute phase of post-traumatic stress disorder. And as you can see, I mean, this graph is all over the place. It lots of high peaks. It's sort of very erratic. And you can imagine if you were, in that car, stop, go, stop, go, stop, go, right? And you can see the jerkiness of this. Now, this is attention deficit disorder. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, to be precise. So if you look at that graph, and then I go back to the graph on that post-traumatic stress disorder, those look really similar to each other. They're actually two entirely different people, and yet a very similar pattern of heart rate variability. So it's like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder has a very similar feeling as post-traumatic stress disorder. All right. Drug addiction, of course, all over the place. Self-regulation, not a popular thing with drug addicts. So, of course, your heart rate variability is going to be very sporadic. And so when we look at heart rate variability, we can do lots of things from a clinical perspective with it, which means I can look at, from a coaching perspective, I can look at health risks and assessments. I can look at the changes in fitness levels. So I work with a lot of clients that are on diets and they want to be able to achieve a certain weight. And this helps me to show them how their fitness is actually getting better and improving as they go and work with their trainer or work with a dietitian. So this really helps me to be able to show them their results other than just losing weight. It's also indicative of a nervous system aging rate. So here's the thing about that, so you have a physiological age and you have a chronological age. And so when you have a discrepancy between those, your heart rate variability can show that your physiological age is, you're actually aging more rapidly than your chronological age. And that's quite an amazing thing to note. So the other thing is as I mentioned before, is being used by a lot of athletes in that peak performance kind of aspect. The difference between gold medal and silver medal can come down to how are you measuring or how are you utilizing their heart rate variability when you train, and as well when you rest and recover. So this is my particular thing, a very particularly good for me. What the graph looks like on a heart rate variability standpoint of something that's nice and coherent. Now, I have an average coherence here of about 7.9, and because the scale goes up to 16, this is really average. This is, sort of like a C on the average scale of heart rate coherence. So I have a place to go. I have improvement to be able to do, and that's really cool. This is me as well, and this is me when I'm actually sick. So these big spikes that you see in the heart rate variability, sort of indicated by those little blue lines, little dotted lines, that's basically what's happening is I'm actually coughing. And I thought this was pretty interesting, as between the coughs that I struggled to get back my heart rate coherence. And so this is something to be really mindful of when you're in with a flu or with a cold or something like that, that it's more difficult for you to get your body back into a state of coherence in that kind of flu or cold-like state. So being healthy, of course, is really, really important. All right. So I talked about this slightly before, which is this idea of self-regulation. And self-regulation is our ability to act in a long-term basis in our best interest, and always keeping in mind our deepest values. And this is one of the things from a coaching perspective that's really important, is me understanding my client's perspective of what their deepest values are and what is their long-term goals. Most people that see me don't really have long-term goals, and they don't really know or connect with their deepest values. So that's part of the exploration process that I go through with people. And our self-regulation is our ability to control our inner states and responses. And this is one of the reasons why I teach NLP, because it has all sorts of techniques about how to control your emotions, attention, your performance, your thoughts, submodalities and anchoring and state changes, and all of these things that we learn from an NLP perspective that helps with self-regulation. And if you think about this concept, this is you being responsible for you. And that's what we promote from an NLP perspective. And this is why this particular tool from HeartMath was so important to me, because I wanted to be able to show people how far away from self-regulation they were, how close to disease that they were, how much their anxiety or depression or their stress in their life was affecting them, not only physiologically, but mentally as well. So it's really not this idea about stress management. It's a really crappy thing from an NLP perspective anyway, because of the fact that the focus is on stress. And that's not what we want to do. We want to turn our focus to what we want instead. And so that's why I prefer energy management. So it's about how you expend energy, how you renew your energy. So renewing emotions such as appreciation create an ordered and harmonious pattern reflecting the activity between the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems that when they're in sync. And so you saw that when I showed you my pattern, that nice, beautiful sine wave pattern, wave-like pattern that allows the sympathetic and parasympathetic autonomic nervous system to be in sync. Coherence helps promote optimal performance, brain function, and resilience, as well as this thing about energy management. A coherent state is not necessarily relaxation, though. In other words, you can have a high heart rate or a low heart rate and still exhibit an ordered, coherent pattern. People often tell me that they do meditation, but when they use the HeartMath tools, they can see that their meditation actually isn't in a coherent pattern. So now that they know how to put themselves into coherent pattern, they can do their meditation and be in a coherent pattern at the same time. Some people, they relax in front of the TV set, and though you might be relaxed, you have, an indicative of a lower heart rate, but you still might be rehashing and processing an argument from earlier in the day unconsciously in the back of your mind. And these people that do these kinds of things have this system of incoherency that's actually draining their energy, even though they're doing absolutely nothing other than watching television, of course. So the coherence techniques that you're about to learn are going to enable you to shift into a coherent and composed state anytime and anywhere. So before I go into the techniques that I want you to know to help you to be able to get into the highest heart rate variability, highest coherence in that heart rate variability that you can. So first I want to show you this. This is one of the participants that I've worked with, and this is sort of her normal reading, just kind of staring out outside and not really doing anything in particular. So just a normal pattern of normal thinking process without anything really going on. This is her having the same type of experience. So this time she's actually experiencing a negative and stressful memory. So if you can look at this one, which is her negative stressful memory, and then the one I showed you before, which is her on a normal, regular, kind of just staring out the window, it looks a lot alike. So you can see that for her, normal wakeful awareness is not necessarily the greatest thing in the world as far as what is happening between her heart and her mind and the connection and communication going between those two. So the communication I can see already isn't all that great. So next, I've asked her to go into her own state of relaxation. So whether that's deep breathing for her or a meditation for her or whatever it is for her, just for her to go into a deep relaxation. And this is what that looks like. So she has a little bit more kind of coherence, but not a lot. It starts resembling a little bit of coherence. Can kind of see that in the middle. There's some wave there, but kind of a little bit small waves and some peaks in there where obviously her brain is going into a different place. And I'd also like to bring your attention to the bottom of the screen where it says spectrum average. So I know that from my training, 0.1 hertz on that spectrum average is where our heart is in the perfect state of coherence. And she's well below that, and her spectrum average is actually in the area that the sympathetic nervous system is operating the most. So before that 0.1 hertz, it's going to be primarily sympathetic. So lots of acceleration going on in that area. Now, you don't see a lot of anxiety, and that's because she's numb to it, right? That's what we had seen before. So even though she's in a relaxed state, her relaxed state doesn't really help her to be able to overcome years and years and years of anxiety. Now, I taught her the heart-focused breathing technique that I'm going to teach you as well. And this is what happened. So now we have more variability. We have a pattern that's being achieved that is more coherence. And you can see at the bottom, the spectrum average moves much closer to that 0.1 hertz. That is so ideal. Now also, if you can look at the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see the coherence ratio, 100% in the green zone, high coherence ratio. Now she's only at a low level of challenge from a coherence perspective. Though, as you can see from the other graphs, she did not get there. 60% only for her relaxation and 24% for her stress, 35% for normal. So her being and utilizing the heart-focused breathing really helped. Now this, by the way, is somebody who's never used the heart-focused breathing technique. I taught her, and I taught her with under 10 seconds how to do it. And this is the result. So it's really, really fantastic to see. Yeah, so this is somebody who has been feeling numb before and now has opportunity to change that experience. Now, for some people who do this and use these techniques, it actually is going to get worse before it gets better. And I kind of have to explain that. You see, by you being numb, or by someone being numb in this state of anxiety or this state of incoherence, a change or shift in that is going to feel unusual. It's going to feel wrong. It's going to feel weird. And for some people, it's actually going to make their heart hurt. And the reason it's doing this is your heart is like any other muscle. And so when you exercise it, it can kind of feel a little bit used. And so what you want to do is make sure that you continue to work and practice once you know the techniques. Because oftentimes we might see some lower values to begin with, and the persistence is what changes it. The persistence allows us to get into a better state of coherence and get more used to feeling in a state of coherence. All right, so there's a couple of techniques that I want to talk to you about. The first is your heart-focused breathing. Now, there are several handouts here for this particular video. One is for the heart-focused breathing, and that's simply you breathing in for a beat of 5 seconds and breathing out for a beat of 5 seconds. And while you are doing that, you are imagining your breath flowing in and out of your heart area. Now, that's all I told my participant, right? And she got those stunning results of being able to get her heart into coherence just with that particular set of instructions. Simple as can be. Inhaling for 5 seconds, exhaling for 5 seconds, and then, of course, having your imagination, having that inhale and exhale coming in and out of your heart area. And that's all there is to it. So very simple. So the instructions that I gave to that participant is to do that 2 to 3 times a day for just 2 to 3 minutes. So can you imagine that? Not 15 minutes of meditation, not an hour-long meditation, not just 2-3 times a day for 2 to 3 minutes. 3 minutes, of course, better, but that's the kind of thing you want to do. And it allows you to get into that state of coherence. Now, some people choose to do this particular technique once at breakfast, once at lunch, once at dinner. If you're struggling with food addictions, I highly recommend that you do it before you eat. It will put your heart into a state of coherence. It will allow you to make better choices about what you put in your mouth. Or before you exercise, allows you to put yourself into a peak state before you go and exercise. And so for me, I choose to do mine when I am in the morning, when I wake up, after I've exercised, in the evening when I go to bed, and during the day, whenever I can fit it in. Sometimes it's going to be at lunch, and sometimes it's going to be after lunch, and it's my way of having sort of a mental break. And so I'm on a track that I do 5 minutes per session at minimum. And so that's just me. That's what I can fit into my life. And as I said, 2 to 3 times a day, just maybe 3 minutes. And that's all you need. So that's the heart-focused breathing. Another handout that I've given you is the depletion to renewal plan. And this is also another great exercise for you to do using the heart math techniques. And it allows you to understand, so the depletion area of this particular worksheet, your incoherent wavelengths, so you're low in your parasympathetic activity. So you're low activity, but incoherent, apathy and sadness, depression, or frustration and resentment, where it's sort of you're more in a normal state as far as you're not accelerating, you're not stopping, but you're still in a sort of negative state. And then anger and anxiety, high levels of frustration or annoyance. Those are more your sympathetic nervous system, your accelerating kind of nervous system taking over. And that area on that side, of course, being not such a great place, because you're going to have high levels of low levels of heart rate variability, as well as very erratic readings. So your happiness and excitement, this is the positive side of a sympathetic nervous system. So being really excited about something. This is one of the things that I use most often in my own training, in my own practice, is excitement. I get really excited about things, and that allows me to have this awesome reading of coherence. And then also love and appreciation, gratitude, really great. And from a nice coherence level, it's not too parasympathetic, not too sympathetic, it's right in the middle. And then contentment and serenity and peace, really being that low level of parasympathetic, or low level of activity, parasympathetic activity, more in that particular zone. But again, positive. So there's a 6-step process here. For you to sort of mark where you are on the graph and mark where you want to go, and sort of have a plan and an action. So from an NLP perspective, we really like having well-formed outcomes, and this helps you to establish what kind of outcome do you want from this type of heart rate variability practice. And the last handout that you have is the quick coherence technique. So the quick coherence technique is doing exactly that heart breathing technique that I talked about before. And now you're just going to add a positive feeling to it. So positive feelings like love, appreciation, gratitude, courage, excitement, peace, joy, bliss, any kinds of these ideas that you have a positive emotional aspect that really brings out the positive feelings inside you. That's really what we're going through, because what we want to do is have that positive feeling in our heart area. So gratitude, sort of beaming from your heart, and or love or compassion beaming from your heart. All of those kinds of things can help you to create this quick coherence technique that you can use anytime, anywhere. And so there's those 3 worksheets for you to work on. And in addition to this, I want to also mention the NLP technique that we use most often, which is called the cancel erase, or what we refer to in Singapore as the CHOI technique. So the idea is that when that negative stuff comes inside your head and you have become aware of it, whether it's depression, anxiety, or any type of stress, ruminating about whatever it is, what you want to do is cancel, erase, stop that thought and replace it with what do you want instead. I use this Cantonese word CHOI, and so somebody had taught me this. It sort of magically erases things that you said out loud that are negative. And so when I find myself, which happens very rarely now, when I find myself going into a negative state, then I will say CHOI to myself, and then I will say, what do I want instead? And most often I actually say these things out loud. And so all my family says CHOI, my husband says CHOI, all sorts of people around me, friends and family, all say CHOI. And because we're focusing on what we want instead. This is what I was talking about before, at the very beginning, about the stress techniques and doing it in the now. So you're feeling that stress. Instead of feeling that stress, you stop, cancel, erase, CHOI, whatever you need to think or say to yourself, and then focus on what do you want instead. Really very important. Now, if this hasn't convinced you, perhaps maybe this last piece will. Our thoughts and emotions affect the heart's magnetic field. So remember when I told you that our heart actually has this amazing rhythm to it, and that electronic magnetic field can be felt, of course, by other people. So it's really important as a mother, as a father, as a colleague, as a friend, when you're out with people that you love and care about, isn't it important that you're giving them your best coherence? Because when we are around people who are coherent like us, we can actually affect others who are incoherent to be able to become coherent. And this is the really important aspect of how we can use this idea of heart rate variability to change our worlds. Even if it's the small world we live in, it can really change our world. All right, so it's really fantastic for you to join me in this video on heart rate variability, the heart connection, a scientific look. And I'm so excited that you have come to join me, and I'll leave it with this and enjoy your worksheets, and let me know if there's anything I can do in the future to help you out in you achieving the best heart rate variability and heart rate coherence that you can.